The literary phenomenon known as the Latin American boom marked a turning point in the perception and value of Latin American literature both regionally and globally. Emerging in the 1960s and 1970s, this movement not only catapulted a group of young Latin American writers to worldwide fame, but also redefined the boundaries of what was possible in the art of narrative. With emblematic figures such as Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Julio Cortázar, Mario Vargas Llosa, and Carlos Fuentes, the Latin American boom brought with it an explosion of creativity, narrative innovation, and a profound questioning of the political, social, and existential reality of Latin America. This video delves into the roots of the Latin American boom, exploring how these authors managed to fuse the rich oral tradition of their respective cultures with avant-garde literary techniques to create works that were at once deeply local and universally relevant. Through its pages, magic, politics, history, and everyday life intertwine in ways that challenge our expectations and perceptions, inviting us on an unparalleled journey through the complexity of the human experience. This literary movement not only elevated its authors to iconic status, but also opened paths for contemporary Latin American voices to continue exploring new directions and challenging the boundaries of language, form, and content. Ultimately, the legacy of the Latin American boom transcends the works of its protagonists to become a testament to the power of literature to connect worlds, ideas, and people across the barriers of time, space, and culture. The Latin American boom was a literary, editorial, cultural, and social phenomenon that emerged between the 1960s and 1970s, when the works of a group of relatively young Latin American novelists were widely distributed in Europe and around the world. The boom is particularly associated with the Colombian Gabriel Garcia Marquez, the Argentine Julio Cortázar, the Peruvian Mario Vargas Llosa, and the Mexican Carlos Fuentes. The correspondence between these four authors was collected in their first joint volume, Las Cartas del Boom. The key moment of the boom was in 1967, with the worldwide success of Garcia Marquez's novel Cien Años de Soledad, and the awarding of the Nobel Prize for Literature to the Guatemalan Miguel Ángel Asturias. Two other of these authors subsequently received the award, Garcia Marquez in 1982 and Mario Vargas Llosa in 2010. Although these writers, according to Ángel Rama and other scholars, commercially represent the boom itself, earlier authors, such as the Mexican Juan Rulfo, the Uruguayan Juan Carlos Onetti, or the Argentine Jorge Luis Borges, had undertaken a renewal of literary writing in the first half of the 20th century. On the other hand, the term boom was extended to all quality authors of the 1960s and 1970s once the impact of the four major writers increased interest in Latin American literature throughout the world. These iconic writers challenged the established conventions of Latin American literature. Their work is experimental and, due to the political climate of 1960s Latin America, also highly political. The sudden success of the boom authors was largely due to the fact that their works were among the first Latin American novels to be published in Europe, specifically by Spanish publishers in Barcelona. Indeed, according to Frederick Nunn, Latin American novelists became world famous through their writing and their advocacy of political and social action, and because many of them were fortunate enough to reach markets and audiences beyond Latin America through translation and travel, and sometimes through exile and seclusion. Characteristics of the Latin American boom. The Latin American boom, more than a simple literary movement, was an explosion of talent and creativity that put Latin American literature on the world stage. Although diverse in style and subject matter, the authors of the boom shared several characteristics that define this phenomenon. 1. Narrative and stylistic innovation. The authors of the boom experimented with non-linear narrative structures, multiple perspectives, and a handling of time that moved away from traditional chronology. This innovation manifested itself in stories where time could be circular, fragmented, or simultaneous, challenging classic narrative conventions. 2. Magical realism. Although not exclusive to the boom and not used by all its exponents, magical realism became one of its most recognizable hallmarks. This technique mixes realistic elements with fantastic or magical events presented in an everyday way, creating worlds in which the extraordinary becomes part of the fabric of reality. Gabriel Garcia Marquez, with his work 100 Years of Solitude, is perhaps the most emblematic example of this style. 3. Universal and local themes. The writers of the boom explored themes of identity, politics, history, and society, drawing a bridge between the universal and the particularly Latin American. Although deeply rooted in their specific cultural contexts, the authors managed to transcend regional borders, engaging with readers around the world about shared human experiences. 4. Social and political criticism. Many works of the boom contain strong criticism of the social and political realities of Latin America, including denunciations of authoritarian regimes, inequality, and imperialism. Through fiction, these writers addressed the conflicts and challenges of their countries, reflecting the turbulence and social changes of the time. 5. Use of language. The boom was characterized by a renewed vigor and richness in the use of language. Authors experimented with the form and function of language to create works that not only told stories, but also explored new expressive possibilities of Spanish, enriching and expanding its narrative capabilities. 6. International recognition. The authors of the boom gained notable international attention, being translated into multiple languages and receiving prestigious literary awards. This phenomenon not only raised the profile of individual writers, but also fostered a renewed interest in Latin American literature in general. The Latin American boom was, in essence, a moment of cultural effervescence that redefined contemporary literature, showcasing the richness and complexity of Latin American societies through its bold and innovative narratives. Key representatives.
Julio Cortázar.
He was born in 1914. He lived with his parents in Switzerland until he moved to Buenos Aires at the age of 4. Like other boom writers, Cortázar came to question the politics of his country. His opposition to Juan Domingo Perón led him to leave his teaching position at the National University of Cuyo and ultimately to his exile. Works of Julio Cortázar. His other works include collections of short stories such as Bestiario, published in 1951, Las Armas Secretas, published in 1959, and Todos los Fuegos El Fuego, published in 1966. He also wrote novels such as Los Premios, published in 1960, and Libro de Manuel, published in 1973, and the unclassifiable Historias de Cronopios y de Famas, published in 1962. He died in Paris on February 12, 1984. Summaries of some of Julio Cortázar's works. Bestiario. Bestiario is a collection of short stories written by Julio Cortázar and first published in 1951. This work marks Cortázar's literary debut and reveals some of the themes and narrative techniques that would later become his distinctive characteristics. The collection is composed of 8 stories that explore themes such as the fantastic, the absurd, the mysterious, and the everyday. The stories are imbued with a surreal atmosphere and often feature inexplicable or irrational elements that challenge the conventions of reality. Each story in Bestiario presents unsettling or disturbing situations that challenge the reader's understanding and invite them to reflect on the nature of human existence and the perception of reality. The characters are often confronted with strange events or encounter inexplicable situations that lead them to question their own identity and the world around them. Among the most notable stories in Bestiario is Casa Tomada, House Taken Over, which tells the story of a pair of siblings who are forced to leave their home after being invaded by mysterious forces. Other notable stories include Carta a una señorita en Paris, Letter to a Young Lady in Paris, La Señorita Cora, Miss Cora, and Final del Juego, End of the Game. Rayuela, Hopscotch. Rayuela is a novel written by Julio Cortázar and published in 1963. It is an innovative work that challenges traditional narrative conventions and offers multiple ways of being read, inviting the reader to actively participate in the construction of the story's meaning. The plot revolves around Horacio Oliveira, an Argentine intellectual living in Paris, and his relationship with the enigmatic Mega and other characters who inhabit his bohemian world. The novel takes place in 2 main parts. The first takes place in Paris and the second in Buenos Aires. What makes Rayuela unique is its non-linear structure. The novel is composed of 155 chapters, but Cortázar suggests that they can be read in different ways. The most common way is following the traditional order of the chapters, but he also proposes a counter-novel, where the chapters are read in a non-linear order, jumping back and forth in the story. The work is full of literary experimentation, wordplay, cultural references, and philosophical reflections. Through the voice of Oliveira, Cortázar explores themes such as the search for the meaning of life, urban alienation, the nature of love, and the role of art in society. Rayuela is considered one of the masterpieces of 20th-century Latin American literature. Its innovative style and thematic richness have influenced generations of writers and readers, making it a benchmark of the Latin American boom and a contemporary classic. Mario Vargas Llosa. Mario Vargas Llosa, Nobel Prize winner for literature in 2010, is a Peruvian writer who has held Spanish nationality since 1993. Mario Vargas Llosa was a Peruvian writer who was born in Arequipa, Peru in 1936. He spent his childhood between Cochabamba and the Peruvian cities of Piura and Lima. Vargas Llosa rose to fame with his novel The City and the Dogs, published in 1962, which surprised by the sophistication of its narrative technique. This novel is at the same time a scathing critique of cruelty and corruption in a Peruvian military school and, by extension, of Peruvian society. Vargas Llosa also wrote The Green House, published in 1966, Conversation in the Cathedral, 1969, and in the post-boom, the novels Pantaleon and the Visitors, 1973, Aunt Julia and the Scriptwriter, 1977, The War of the End of the World, 1981, Praise of the Stepmother, 1988, Don Rigoberto's Notebooks, 1997, The Feast of the Goat, published in 2000, Paradise in the Other Corner, published in 2003, Mischief of the Bad Girl, 2006, The Dream of the Celt, 2010, and The Discreet Hero, 2013. He has been awarded the most important prizes and distinctions worldwide, and his books have been translated into almost all languages. We will not make summaries of Mario Vargas Llosa's works since we are working on a video where we will talk in greater detail about this author. If the video is published, we will leave you a description on the cards. Augusto Roa Bastos, Paraguayan, author of Son of Man, considered by some to be the first novel of the boom. His novel Yo El Supremo has been compared to Joyce's Ulysses and is one of the most respected works in the history of fiction that South America has produced. Summary of the work Yo El Supremo by Augusto Roa Bastos. Yo El Supremo is a novel written by Paraguayan author Augusto Roa Bastos, first published in 1974. It is a monumental work that offers a fictional and critical view of the life and government of Paraguayan dictator José Gaspar Rodríguez de Francia, known as El Supremo. The narrative unfolds through a complex and multifaceted structure. Roa Bastos uses a variety of literary techniques, such as interior monologue, dialogue, fictional historical documents, and third-person narration, to create a rich and multidimensional plot. The story is set in 19th-century Paraguay and focuses on the figure of the dictator El Supremo. The novel is told from the perspective of the dictator himself, who is presented as an omnipotent and autocratic tyrant who rules with an iron fist over his country. Through his reflections and memories, the reader witnesses the turbulent events and political intrigues that marked his rule. Throughout the novel, themes such as abuse of power, corruption, oppression, political violence, and the alienation of the individual in a totalitarian society are explored. Roa Bastos uses the figure of the dictator to more broadly examine the human condition and the dynamics of power in Latin America. Yo El Supremo is considered one of the most important works of 20th-century Latin American literature. Its narrative complexity and its deep exploration of universal themes make it an essential read for those interested in Latin American history and politics, as well as in the literature of dictatorship and tyranny.
Alejo Carpentier.
He was a Cuban and French writer who had a notable influence on Latin American literature during its heyday. Critics considered him one of the fundamental writers of the 20th century in the Spanish language, and one of the architects of the Latin American literary renewal, in particular through a style that incorporates various dimensions and aspects of the imagination to recreate reality, elements that contributed to his formation and use of the marvelous real. Some of his novels: The Kingdom of This World, published in 1949, The Lost Steps, 1953, The Harassment, 1956, The Century of Enlightenment, 1962, Baroque Concert, 1974, The Resource of the Method, 1974, The Rite of Spring, 1978, The Harp and the Shadow, 1979. Summaries of some of the works of Alejo Carpentier. The Kingdom of This World. The Kingdom of This World is a novel written by the Cuban author Alejo Carpentier and published for the first time in 1949. This work is considered one of the fundamental pieces of magical realism and one of the most important contributions to Latin American literature of the 20th century. The novel is set in Haiti during the period of the Haitian Revolution at the end of the 18th century and beginning of the 19th century. It tells the story of Tinoel, a mulatto slave who witnesses and participates in the tumultuous events that led to Haiti's independence and the overthrow of the French colonial regime. Throughout the story, Carpentier intertwines historical elements with magical and folkloric elements, creating a rich and evocative narrative. The novel is imbued with a sense of the marvelous and the mysterious, where everyday reality mixes with the supernatural and the transcendental. The kingdom of this world explores themes such as colonial oppression, the struggle for freedom, cultural identity, and the relationship between the individual and history. Carpentier presents the Haitian Revolution as a moment of radical transformation, where old social and political structures are questioned and subverted. Carpentier's prose is lush and poetic, filled with vibrant images and detailed descriptions that transport the reader into the unique atmosphere of colonial Haiti. The novel is a powerful meditation on history and memory, and its influence extends beyond the borders of Latin American literature, inspiring generations of writers and readers around the world. The Century of Enlightenment. The Century of Enlightenment is a novel written and first published in 1962. This work is an epic exploration of the history of the Caribbean during the 18th century, a period of great social, political, and cultural transformation. The story follows the lives of two French Caribbean siblings, Esteban and Sofia, who were separated in their youth due to the turbulent circumstances of the time. Esteban, the eldest brother, becomes an explorer and adventurer, while Sofia becomes the wife of a French aristocrat and moves to Paris. Through the lives of Esteban and Sofia, Carpentier offers a panoramic view of 18th century Caribbean and European society, exploring themes such as slavery, colonization, the mixing of cultures, the search for freedom, and the struggle for identity. The novel is written in a Baroque and exuberant style, characteristic of Carpentier's marvelous realism. The prose is filled with vivid images and detailed descriptions that transport the reader to the landscapes and settings of 18th century Caribbean and Europe. The Century of Lights is a masterful work that combines historical narrative with elements of the magical and the surreal. Through his exploration of Caribbean history and culture, Carpentier offers a profound reflection on the complexities of colonialism and the struggle for freedom in the modern world. We pause for a moment to ask you to leave us a comment. What do you think of this information about the Latin American boom? Which author or work do you like the most? If you find the video useful, we appreciate if you give it a like to support our project, and if you subscribe, thank you very much. We continue.
Carlos Fuentes.
Born in Panama to Mexican parents in 1928, Carlos Fuentes began publishing in the 1950s. He was the son of a Mexican diplomat and lived in cities such as Buenos Aires, Santiago, Quito, Montevideo, and Rio de Janeiro, as well as Washington, D.C. His experiences fighting discrimination against Mexico in the United States led him to examine Mexican culture more closely. His novel The Death of Artemio Cruz, published in 1962, describes the life of a former Mexican revolutionary on his deathbed, employing innovative changes in point of view. Other important works include The Most Transparent Region, published in 1959, Aura, 1962, Terra Nostra, 1975, and the post-boom novel Gringo Viejo, 1985. Summaries of some of Carlos Fuentes' works. The Death of Artemio Cruz. It is a novel written by the author Carlos Fuentes and published in 1962. The work narrates the life of Artemio Cruz, a powerful and ambitious man who, on his deathbed, reflects on his past and the events that led him to become the controversial figure that he is. The novel is structured in 3 parts that represent the different stages of Artemio Cruz's life: his idealistic youth and early revolutionary ideals, his rise to power and corruption during the Mexican Revolution, and his life as a rich and powerful man in post-revolutionary society. Through narrative, Fuentes explores themes such as corruption, power, ambition, betrayal, and mortality. The Death of Artemio Cruz is a reflection on human nature and the complexity of Mexican society, as well as a critique of the political and social institutions of his time. Fuentes' narrative technique includes the use of flashbacks and shifts in perspective, allowing the reader to gain a more complete view of Artemio Cruz's life and personality. The novel is considered one of the most important works of 20th-century Latin American literature and has been praised for its psychological depth and innovative style. Juan Rulfo. He was a Mexican writer, screenwriter, and photographer, belonging to the generation of 52. Born on May 16, 1917 in Mexico City. He is considered one of the most important Hispanic-American writers of the 20th century. His reputation is based on two of his three narrative works: the book of short stories El Llano en Llamas, published in 1953, and his novel Pedro Páramo, published in 1955. His works present a combination of reality and fantasy, whose action takes place in rural settings after the Mexican Revolution and the Cristero War. Characterized as a legend of Mexico, Rulfo was recognized as an introverted, shy, and enigmatic individual. He was silent, realistic, jealous of his privacy, critical, and creative. His stories show his contributions to Latin American and world literature, in which he shows Christian and indigenous traditions presenting diverse socio-economic situations of people with deficiencies, lack of opportunities, loneliness, war, relationship between nature and man, forms of human composition, examples of relationships between man and the world, concrete and environmental realities. Summaries of some of Juan Rulfo's works.
Pedro Páramo.
Pedro Páramo is a novel written by the Mexican author Juan Rulfo and published in 1955. The work is considered one of the most important pieces of Latin American literature of the 20th century and one of the most outstanding examples of magical realism. The story follows Juan Preciado, who travels to the town of Comala, a town in the Mexican state of Colima, in search of his father, Pedro Páramo, at the request of his mother on her deathbed. However, upon arriving in Comala, Juan discovers a desolate place inhabited by souls in torment, where the living and the dead coexist in a blurry world between reality and fantasy. As Juan explores the town, he meets a number of characters who are somehow connected to Pedro Páramo and his turbulent past. Through a series of flashbacks and fragmented narrations, the story of Pedro Páramo is revealed, a powerful and ruthless man who exercised tyrannical control over the town and the people who inhabited it. The novel explores themes such as loneliness, death, power, redemption, and memory. Rulfo's prose is evocative and atmospheric, creating a sense of mystery and an oppressive environment that reflects the desolation of the town of Comala and the desperation of its inhabitants. Pedro Páramo is a literary masterpiece that has been praised for its innovative style and thematic depth. Its influence extends beyond Latin American literature, being a fundamental work in the world literary canon. It was a novel highly esteemed by authors such as Jorge Luis Borges, who said of it, "Pedro Páramo is one of the best novels in Hispanic literature, and even in all literature." The Burning Plain. It is a collection of short stories written and published in 1953. This work is considered one of the most important in Mexican literature of the 20th century and a key piece of magical realism. The collection is made up of 17 stories that explore life in the Mexican countryside, especially in the Llano, an extensive, arid, and desolate plain. Each story presents a raw and heartbreaking vision of rural reality, showing the harshness of life, poverty, violence, and hopelessness that the characters face. The stories in The Burning Plain are populated by marginalized and distressed characters, such as peasants, day laborers, muleteers, and ordinary people who struggle to survive in a hostile environment. Through these stories, Rulfo captures the oppressive atmosphere and fatalism that characterize life in the Llano. Rulfo's style is concise and evocative, using simple yet powerful language that allows the reader to immerse themselves in the arid landscapes and difficult lives of the characters. In addition, the author incorporates elements of magical realism and popular mythology, adding a mysterious and often surreal dimension to the stories. El Llano en Llamas is acclaimed for its emotional depth, unique literary style, and vivid depiction of rural Mexican reality. The work has been studied and admired by generations of readers and critics, consolidating Juan Rulfo's legacy as one of the great writers of Spanish-language literature.
Miguel Ángel Asturias.
Born in Guatemala City on October 19, 1899, he was a Guatemalan writer, journalist, and diplomat who contributed to the development of Latin American literature, influenced Western culture, and at the same time drew attention to the importance of indigenous cultures, especially those of his native country, Guatemala. Although Asturias was born and raised in Guatemala, he lived a significant part of his adult life abroad. During his first stay in Paris in the 1920s, he studied anthropology and indigenous mythology. Some scholars consider him the first Latin American novelist to show how the study of anthropology and linguistics could influence literature. In Paris, Asturias also became associated with the Surrealist movement. He is credited with introducing many features of the modernist style into Latin American letters. As such, he was an important precursor of the Latin American boom of the 1960s and 1970s. After decades of exile and marginalization, Asturias finally gained widespread recognition in the 1960s. In 1965, he won the Soviet Union's Lenin Peace Prize. Then, in 1967, he received the Nobel Prize for Literature, thus becoming the third non-American author to receive this honor, after Gabriela Mistral in 1945 and St. John Peirce in 1960, and the second Latin American. Asturias spent his last years in Madrid, where he died at the age of 74. Some of his works were novels.
El Señor Presidente, published in 1946, Hombres de Maíz, 1949, Viento Fuerte, 1950, El Papa Verde, 1954. Los Ojos de los Sufridos, 1960, El Alajadito, 1961, Mulata de Tal, 1963, Maladrón, Epopeya de los Andes Verdes, 1969, Viernes de Dolors, 1972.
Short stories.
Rayito de Estrella, Leyendas de Guatemala, Weekend en Guatemala, Clarivigilia Primaveral, El Espejo de Lida Sal, 3 de 4 soles.
Summaries of some of the works of Miguel Ángel Asturias. Mr. President. Mr. President is a novel written and published in 1946. The work is a fierce criticism of dictatorships and authoritarian regimes, inspired by the dictatorship of President Manuel Estrada Cabrera in Guatemala at the beginning of the 20th century. With this work, Miguel Ángel Asturias won the 1967 Nobel Prize for Literature. The plot follows the story of a fictional country called El País, governed by an authoritarian leader known as El Señor Presidente. This leader, unnamed in the novel, exercises total control over his country, suppressing any form of opposition and perpetuating a climate of fear and repression. The novel's main character is a man called the Colonel, who is initially a loyal servant of the president, but who becomes embroiled in a series of events that lead him to question his loyalty and morality. As the story progresses, the Colonel faces ethical dilemmas and struggles to find redemption in a world dominated by tyranny. El Señor Presidente is a powerful work that addresses themes such as oppression, corruption, political violence, and the fight for justice. Asturias uses a narrative style that combines realistic elements with surreal and symbolic elements, creating a dark and oppressive atmosphere that reflects the political and social reality of Latin America at that time. The novel is considered one of the most important works of Latin American literature and has been praised for its thematic depth, innovative literary style, and courageous denunciation of social and political injustices. El Señor Presidente continues to be relevant today as a powerful reminder of the dangers of abuse of power and lack of democracy.
Ernesto Sábato Rojas.
Born on June 24, 1911 in Santos Lugares, he was an Argentine writer, painter, and physicist.
His narrative work consists of 3 novels, El túnel, sobre héroes y tumbas Andavado el exterminador.
He also stood out as an essayist in books such as Uno y el Universo, Hombres y Máquinas, El Escritor y sus Fantasmas, and Apologias y Recuperations, in which he reflects on the human condition, the vocation of writing, or the cultural problems of the 20th century. He was the second Argentine to be awarded the Miguel de Cervantes Prize in 1984 after Jorge Luis Borges in 1979. Summaries of some of the works of Ernesto Sábato Rojas.
El túnel.
The Tunnel is a novel written by Argentine author Ernesto Sábato and published in 1948. The story is narrated in the first person by the protagonist, Juan Pablo Castel, an introspective and solitary painter who finds himself imprisoned for the murder of Maria Iribarne. a woman he loved obsessively. The plot begins with Castell recounting the events that led him to commit the crime, while reflecting on his own tormented mind. Castell describes how he met Maria at an art exhibition, where he became obsessed with her from the first moment. As their relationship progresses, Castell develops increasing paranoia and a feeling that Maria is betraying and deceiving him. The relationship between Castell and Maria becomes increasingly tense and dysfunctional, culminating in a moment of extreme violence when Castell commits murder. Through Castell's narrative, the reader is immersed in the protagonist's mind, exploring his paranoia, loneliness, and struggle with reality. The Tunnel is a novel that explores themes such as loneliness, alienation, obsession, and madness. Sabato uses intense, visceral prose to immerse the reader in the turbulent mind of his protagonist, creating a claustrophobic and oppressive atmosphere that reflects Castell's mental state. The work is considered a classic of Argentine literature and one of the main existentialist novels in the Spanish language. The Tunnel has been praised for its psychological depth, innovative literary style, and ability to capture the complexity of the human condition. About Heroes and Tombs. On Heroes and Tombs is a novel written and published in 1961. It is a complex and profound work that combines elements of psychological, political, philosophical, and existentialist novels. The main plot follows the story of two Argentine families, the Alvarez and the Vidal. Martín, one of the main characters, is a member of the Alvarez family and is obsessed with Alejandra, a woman belonging to the Vidal family. Their relationship develops amidst a background of family conflicts, psychological problems, and political and social tensions in mid-20th century Argentina. Throughout the novel, themes such as identity, madness, guilt, loneliness, corruption, and the search for meaning in a chaotic world are explored. Sabato's narrative is complex and often surreal, with abrupt shifts between reality and fantasy, and a mix of symbolic and metaphorical elements. The work also includes the story of Juan Pablo Castell, the protagonist of The Tunnel, Sabato's previous novel. Through her reflections on life and death, Castell offers a philosophical perspective on the themes explored in the novel. On Heroes and Tombs is considered one of the most important works of 20th century Argentine and Latin American literature. Its innovative literary style and thematic depth have been widely praised by critics and readers. The novel is a fascinating exploration of the human condition and a reflection on Argentine society in a period of change and conflict. Finally, here are some other authors who have been associated with the Latin American boom.
Elena Garro, Mexican, author of Los Recuerdos del Porvenir. María Luisa Bombal, Chilean, author of La Última Niebla and La Amortajada.
Clarice Lispector, Brazilian, author of La Hora de la Estrella.
José Donoso, Chilean, whose main works include El obsceno pájaro de la noche and El lugar sin límites.
Emmanuel Puig, Argentine, author of Boquitas Pinturas and El beso de la mujer araña, among other books. Salvador Garmendia, Venezuelan, author of the novels Los Pequeños series and Memorias de Altagracia, National Literature Prize of Venezuela in 1973 and Juan Rulfo Prize in France in 1989. But now it's your turn to tell us, what do you think of this information about the Latin American boom? Did you know this information? Which author or work did you like the most? If you think we forgot to mention an author, let us know in the comments. If you found the video useful, we would appreciate it if you give it a like to support our project and if you subscribe. Thanks for watching and see you next time.